I swear there was more people here last week. The faithful few, the remnant. Appreciate you coming back for a second week in a row. Today we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday. It's always the second Sunday of Easter, right after. And I want to really focus today on how should we understand God's mercy? What does God's mercy really mean in our lives? It made me think of a movie, which isn't surprising or anything special. Everything makes me think of a movie. But this is a movie, I'm going to give a spoiler because it's my belief that if it's been out for more than a year, it's your fault, not mine, for talking about it. So I'm not going to talk about The Northman or Father Stu because those are still in theaters, although I could. This one's called The Machinist. It's with Christian Dail. Has anyone ever even heard of this? It's one of those cult classics. It came out in the early 2000s. It's a fascinating film. And what I want to emphasize in this first movie reference is the effects of sin upon us. Because you can't understand God's mercy without understanding sin. Because God's mercy is his response to sin. And in this movie, we open up to Christian Bale. He's about 115 pounds, right? They weren't even going to shoot the film for years because they couldn't find an actor who could actually play the part. He had to drop down to just pure skin and bones to play this role. And he's an insomniac. He can't sleep at night. He barely eats enough food to keep himself alive. And he begins having these visions of this ghoulish, big, old, fat man who's following him. And everywhere he goes, he's causing him trouble. Whenever he sees that man, something happens. Whether it works, something breaks apart, a relationship goes bad, he gets in an accident. And so he keeps feeling stalked by this person. At the same time, because he can't sleep at night, he starts going to a cafe. And there he meets this beautiful Hispanic woman who works nights to support her 7-year-old child. And so he'd spend just all night at this airport cafe talking with her. And little by little, they develop a relationship. And so they start going on dates. He gets to know their son. But at the same time, this ghoulish figure keeps showing up everywhere and just causing all this trouble. At the high point of the film, though, because you start to get to a point where you don't really know what's real and what's not real, what's in his imagination and what's actually happening in his life. But at the highest point, you see a flashback. And he's perfectly healthy, he's fit, he's happy, and he's driving this really nice car. And he's smoking and listening to music. And so he's not paying attention to the road. And he runs a stop sign. And as he runs that stop sign, he hits a child. And he pumps the brakes really fast. He looks back. And you see now this woman running over to this child. And it's actually that Hispanic woman and her 7-year-old child that he's hit. And you see him about to get out of the car, and then he looks back, and then he drives away. And so ever since that point, he was able to escape the crime, but he couldn't escape his own conscience. So he became so devoured in himself by guilt that he couldn't sleep anymore, he couldn't eat, and then he even started having visions of this woman and her child. And so it's a very deep, and this is even Christianity. This is just psychology 101, that there's a law written within us that we did not put in our hearts. And when we do not follow that law, we can't escape the guilt that arises in it. No matter how many people say that it's okay or we should be fine with it, we can't escape the voices of conscience within our own heart. But there's this really beautiful scene at the end. At one point, he was on a roller coaster, and he was coming up at the top, and it said, basically, if you go forward, you go straight into hell, you drop down, and if you take the exit, you can go into heaven. And he's on this roller coaster, and he's frantically trying to move the roller coaster to go right towards heaven. And then it takes him down into hell, and all this, crazy ride and phenomenon happens. But at the end of the film, after he remembers what had happened, that he did hit and kill this child and flew from the scene, he was riding out of town. He was trying to escape, just I need to go somewhere else. And it says, freeway entrance, if you go straight, and then you see an exit that says police station, exit 1. He can go straight into freedom, but find himself in hell, remaining in this hell of his own tortured conscience, or he can take the exit into salvation, confession, and repentance. I won't spoil that part of the film. If you actually want to watch it, I'll keep that up. So the point of the film, though, is that it's such a great image of the fact that you can keep running all your life from the evil that is within our own hearts, but we can never escape it. That's the one place we can never get away from, is our own conscience, is our hearts. We can all escape punishment for a moment, but none of us knows how to escape our own conscience. One student recently started coming to church, and he was a senior. And I asked him, why is it that you started coming back? Like, I haven't seen you all this time. And he goes, every day I walk by that church, St. Paul's, and every day I felt bad because I knew I should be going. I should be at least giving that much, but I couldn't do it. He goes, and I couldn't get rid of the guilt that was within me that kept calling me back. And finally, just this last Easter, I said, for Lent, I need to start going to church again. And he said, I never felt so free and good because for the first time I was riding within my conscience. And I thought it was really interesting verbiage, riding within my conscience. We all get flack for like Catholic guilt. Oh, it's that Catholic guilt that makes you feel bad about what you do. You know who doesn't feel guilt about what they do? Psychopaths. That's why they do what they do, because they don't feel bad about it. It's actually a psychological problem to not feel guilt. Guilt is a wonderful thing because it saves us like pain. The reason we have so much sensitivity in the most vulnerable places of our body, it's our way of our body protecting ourselves. So that when I feel pain, I know that I'm hurting myself and I need to back away. God has given us a pain in our conscience to let us know when we're going off the road and we can get hurt. Anyone ever been driving at night and they have those, what are they called? The little rubber strips, the sleeper lines. What happens when you hit those? Like, brrr, that whole thing? Try riding on that for like 5 minutes and see how that feels. Right? It wakes you up, it shocks you, and it makes you get right back on the road. That's what God has put in our conscience. And that's why Christian Bale, when he got in that accident and he ran away, he could escape the scene, but he couldn't escape the rubber strips on the side of his heart. And it was destroying him. That's why we really have to think about what are the things in my heart I know I feel bad about. I know are wrong. Even if my reason tells me don't worry about it. It's like I really have to pay attention to that. And there's an idea here that sin is its own punishment. When we sin, we are hurting ourselves. It's like drinking a poison. So God isn't looking up from above like Zeus ready to throw a thunderbolt at us whenever we do wrong. Things are wrong because they hurt us. And when we engage in them, we take a poison within ourselves that little by little defiles the true image of the children of God and our eternal destiny that we're supposed to live in. I was thinking about like McDonald's. McDonald's, healthy food, right? Eat it every day for 3 meals in a row. Every day. And tell yourself every day that it's a healthy, all-American food. What is going to happen to your body when you do it? Right? It's the same thing with sin. It's like we can try to tell ourselves that what we're doing is okay. But when we take that into ourselves, it's going to have effect negatively on its own accord. That's the nature of sin. So what do we mean when we talk about God's mercy? Because it seems like in our times, it's almost become like the trump card. Oh, God is merciful. He'll understand. God is merciful. He won't hold this against me. And it's like a trump card. I can get out of anything. I can do anything I want because God is merciful. Well, God's mercy is a remedy. If sin is a poison, then God's mercy is the medicine for the sin. So even if I know a doctor, even if my own dad is a doctor, if I have an illness and I do not go to him for the medicine to ask for help, what's going to happen? Can I tell my body, my dad's a doctor, it's okay? Like, no, I'm not taking in the medicine that is actually going to heal me. So Christ told St. Faustina, a Polish nun in the 20th century, it was based on her that we have the Divine Mercy Chaplet, that we have the second Sunday of Easter dedicated Divine Mercy, and that we'll be doing our holy hour to the Divine Mercy this afternoon at 3 p.m. He said to her once, "Before I come as the just judge, I first open wide the door of my mercy. He who refuses to pass through the door of my mercy must pass through the door of my justice. My mercy is a sign for the end times. After it will come the day of justice. While there is still time, let all people have recourse to the fount of my mercy. Let them profit from the blood and water which gushed forth for them." So God offers his mercy, but we have to choose to accept it, to return. It's like the prodigal son had to come home to receive his father's mercy. And that's why the sin of presumption is the sin of our times. And we've spoken about this. We assume that God will just forgive my sins because he's loving. But Thomas never would have experienced the wounds of Jesus Christ had he not come back. He missed it the first time. He had to come back. Peter and Judas, they both denied Jesus Christ on the night of their ordination. Same night. Peter came back and became the first pope and the rock of our church. Total forgiveness. Judas never came home. And that's the only evil that we really have to fear in our life. To not come home. There's a lot of people who are not coming to Mass today, all around the world. And they're believing a very wicked lie that is being told to them by the evil one. That God is merciful, he understands, and you don't need to go to church. That's the devil's way of keeping us from receiving the medicine that we need for our salvation. That's the only real danger in our life. To not come back to Christ. And there's another side, and I think this other side would probably relate more to all of us here today, because you guys are here. And that's, I see people who are striving for holiness. They're going to Mass. It's really hard. They're even standing apart from all their friends to do the right things. Bible studies, confessions. And yet, they find themselves still struggling with the same old sins. Like, Father, why do I keep falling into this sin? If God is loving and merciful, why does he keep allowing me to fall? It's a really good question. And if you want, I will ask him to give you new sins to fall into. That way it gets a little more creative. Or take away lust and give them murder for a week. I don't know. So, I don't know what you're really looking for, but we're always going to fall. And that's where you have to be merciful on yourself. If you are striving to come to the sacraments, if you're coming to Mass, and you're going to confession when you fall, you have to really be bold in embracing God's mercy for you. Because the way that the devil will speak to you is through guilt and making you feel like you're never good enough. You are home. You're striving. You're doing everything that you have to do. That's enough. As long as we're on this earth, we will be sinners and we will fall. The only idea of true perfection for those who are striving for heaven is to never give up on asking for God for his mercy. And sometimes he leaves souls in a state of falling into the same sins again and again and again for a simple reason. To let them know that he's more interested in them coming to him than just eradicating all sins from their life. The most important movement of our life is not to be statically in front of God, but to be always moving back to him in an attitude of total trust and surrender and childlike love to the Father. That you are bigger than my sins. No matter how many times I fall, you will always be the mercy that I need to get me where I need to be in my life. And even if that's not where I want to be right now, I trust you. And I think that applies much more to everybody who is here this week. The ones who needed the first sins on the presumption aren't here today. What you need to do is embrace the mercy of God that is with you while you are here now. And make that resolution. No matter what happens in my life, no matter how many times I fall, I'm never going to give up on coming home. on experiencing the Lord's mercy in the most holy Eucharist and in the confessional. When Jesus Christ was crucified and pierced in the side, blood and water poured out from his side. And from the beginning of the church, there's been one interpretation of that image, one that is perdured all the time, that the water that came forth from the side of Christ was baptism and confession that cleanses us, and the blood, the most holy Eucharist. And to the degree that we claim Christ's body and blood, that water coming from his side for ourselves, by going to confession over and over and over again, and receiving the Eucharist over and over and over again. And every single one of us will be able to join in St. Thomas in the greatest proclamation of faith that we have ever seen in the Scriptures, when we come into contact with the divinity of Jesus Christ in the flesh. My Lord and my God. And that is what the mercy of God is all about in the end.